Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining our live, and this will be recorded afterwards. So if you miss parts of it, you can definitely catch them up. I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar this evening on masculinity in 2025 on behalf of my good friend Connor Warren from Spark UK. My name is Stefano Dorico, or Steph. I'm a Politics International Studies and Hispanic Studies student at the University of Warwick. Second year, but I've been a mental health campaigner for about 4 or 5 years now. I'm 20 years old. So at the end, there will also be a chance to ask any questions to the whole panel. But if you have any specific questions which you'd like to run past me, I'm more than happy to help. Well, I'm going to hand over to the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Ruth.
Hi everybody, I'm Ruth Page and I'm a professor at the University of Birmingham, and I'm here because I'm going to talk about some of the research that we've done around mental health influences and the impact that they have on young people. Nice to see you all.
And Nick.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. So I am the co-founder of a business called the 3E Space, the 3 E's being explore, energize, and empower. I'm a men's coach and I'm in my 50s now, and I've had a lot of mental health challenges growing up through adolescence and into a young man. So I bring some lived experience to this debate as well.
Cool.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul Hamwell. I'm the founder of U-Shoots, which is a resilience and mental wellbeing training program for young people in primary and secondary schools. I've done lots of work with young people prior to that in terms of mental health projects, working with young offenders, young LGBT young people, etc. And really enjoy working and empowering young people to develop and be the best versions of themselves that they can be. Really delighted to be invited to be part of this webinar by Connor. I'm also on the board of trustees for Spark UK, hence why I'm also here at the same time, and really looking forward to having a really interesting discussion around this really important topic that I know is on everyone's lips these days.
Yes, thank you. And definitely a really important topic that we've seen to introduce the theme. Masculinity has been really discussed this year, especially with the onset of the Netflix series Adolescence, which I'm sure will come up at one point as we chat through this evening, as well as different strategies which have been announced. We're on the back of Men's Health Month, and the new 10-year strategy has recently been announced by the government, as well as a few different other political and thematic themes which have come up. But I think the best way to kick this off is a very simple 3 to 5 words. I won't be too strict with the panel this evening, but what does masculinity mean to you all in 2025? And Nick, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
No, that's fine. Start with a really straightforward, easy question. That has a simple answer, not
always.
But no, I think for me personally, as a man and in the work that I do, I would say it's masculinities, plural. I don't think there's just one version, and actually it can be problematic to try and zone in on what it is. But I think words that come up for me definitely are embracing authenticity and empathy.
It's lovely. Paul?
Yeah, you gave me the good challenge of trying to sum it in a few words. I would say challenging for the subject matter, expectations that are placed on anyone who identifies as male, and I think it's also different to everyone.
Love that. Ruth?
My word is spiky. And I think in 2025, partly because of adolescence and partly because some of the conversations that have been really forced into the media in a way that the conversations have been there, but they've been particularly present this year. So I'd say spiky because I think there are critical things that have really come to our attention in the ways that you go, oh, and that draws your attention to it. But I would say also there's a lot that when we've talked to young men hasn't changed very much. So I think there were kind of like peaks, but there were also there's a lot underneath the surface that, yeah, this is in 2025. We're having conversations that were happening decades ago. So there's much that has, come into sharp focus this year, I think, but there are also themes that come back that are really, quite similar to things that we've seen before, pressures variation questions that young men are asking that are pretty foundational, I think. So yeah, spiky is my word.
I really like that spiky idea to sort of think about how we've almost seen it as a graph over the year, over the chart. We're coming, the advent calendar now for Spark is in the 12th month, which is really nice because we can see the whole year and graph it and to put out a chart. And spiky is definitely a good way to summarize masculinity this year. For me, I think in a way of strength, it's probably emotionally in touch, respectful, but also highs, lows, and that area in between, that liminal space is so important. So I'm going to go first to Nick and then on to you, Ruth. I'd love to know what are the biggest pressures men are experiencing right now around masculinity.
And I think this is to speak to what Ruth mentioned. For me, some of the biggest pressures are very similar to the pressures I grew up with, to embody a version of masculinity which sits under the kind of man box, which, you know, Paul Cavell, Tony Porter's work, and feeling a pressure to embody all of that in an unrealistic way, a perfectionist way. No room for failure, no room for lack of economic success or emotional struggle. And these are very complex topics, but I think those are the kind of key areas as I see it.
So shall I jump in? So I want to talk about this from the perspective of myself listening to lots of young people. So the project that I lead really came about because we were trying to listen to young people. And so one of the things that we did was we went out to, I think, 18 different schools and colleges, really different schools and colleges across the Midlands. We were asking them about mental health influences. We didn't go really to try and find anything out about gender, but one of the things that was really striking about what the young men told us in particular was just how much pressure they felt and how much negative judgment they felt around being able to talk about their mental health. And it kind of shocked me because, you know, I am not young anymore by any stretch of the imagination. And they were very clear, actually, consistently, regardless of whichever school I was in, whichever college I was in, that consistently they told us that they felt that they were seen as weak or woke if they talked about their mental health, that their friends would laugh at them if they talked about their struggles, and what they would much rather do instead was go to the gym and work out, which is fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with going to the gym, and physical fitness is related to our mental health in all kinds of important ways. So it's not that that is wrong at all, but what really struck me was how very strongly gendered that conversation around mental health is in ways that have become, as I say, spiky, kind of like really pushed to an apex. But alongside that, at exactly the same time, we know, because we went back and talked to the young men again, was they're actually experiencing a whole range of pressures. You know, like, actually, how do you make friends? How do you feel like you fit in? There's a lot of pressure around parental validation. So feeling like they needed to make their parents happy, whether that was in relation to their academic performance or whether that was to do with some kind of leisure pursuit, whether that was sport or music. There was a lot of struggle around how to handle conflict, particularly in relation to politics or where there were kind of really hot spots of opinion. Struggles with body image, actually. So the whole kind of cutting and bulking culture around going to the gym, knowing how to handle their emotions, all of that was actually playing out under the surface at the same time where actually it's really difficult to talk about that, or at least for some of them, it was really difficult to talk about that in a kind of open way with their peers, for sure, and with their parents, often difficult, with teachers, also often difficult. So how do you find that trusted friend in a context where you need to have that conversation? So I would say that for us, that was a really powerful picture of the pressure that many young men, so we were talking to 16 to 18-year-olds, just to put an age bracket around that those young men in particular were really quite frank about telling us about.
No, that's really powerful. And as you said it, Ruth, I was recalling an interaction I had with a really good friend of mine. We were in the gym, was just us two actually alone, and he just turns to me and just starts telling me about a time that he was in the gym at school and he just started crying just halfway through a workout. I just had to leave the gym, just didn't know what was going on. This feeling of insecurity in his body. He knew his eating was off. He knew he was controlling his eating. He knew that he had, I'd almost use the word toxic obsession with the gym. And yeah, it was just really powerful. So I'm really excited to read some of your research and to speak more about it in the near future. But what you described there is really a culture amongst young men. But do you mind going into a bit about how you see digital culture, and I'm not just restricting it to social media here, and how it shapes the way boys think about being man?
Yeah, so our project is all about social media influences, particularly about mental health influences. But we talk to these young people that I mentioned. So I think there are about 95 of them, maybe nearly 100 by the time we counted it all up. And one of the things about influencers are that people follow them because they are to do with interests, leisure interests. So, for example, our young people that we talked to, the young men followed them because they were gamers, or they were sports figures like bodybuilding or footballers, or they were food influencers. And so they are also people that people find sort of appealing or funny, or, just caught their attention, but often kind of tapping into some of the leisure interests that are going on in the world outside the digital. So it's not that the digital is completely divorced from outside activity. It's not. Those two things actually tend to go hand in hand together. But what you see through that is a kind of funneling, if you like, into specific spaces, which, because of the way that algorithms work, when you follow and view content, because in some sites, the way that the algorithm works, it tends to kind of feed off what you watch rather than what you tell it you don't want to watch. You end up seeing more and more of the same things being pushed through to you. So in the case of influencers and young men in particular, that means that certain kinds of masculinity are being presented to them, often as ideal or aspirational, that it's somebody that you can take control of your life. You can be anybody you want to be, that whole influencer rhetoric of the kind of entrepreneurial self. And this is what success looks like. And that success looks like having a certain kind of body, appearing a certain kind of way, having success in a certain kind of way. So I would say in terms of the digital, that is how I would see that it works from the data that we looked at. I'm going to draw on some of the research that my colleagues do at the University of Birmingham, where they've specifically looked into the way that that context around gym and fitness and the entrepreneurial self can sometimes be a space where hyper-masculine influences sit on the edge of that. Andrew Tate is a very well-known name, which unfortunately doesn't require too much explanation, but that kind of narrative of self-improvement can often sit alongside actually a very toxic narrative towards women in particular. So in terms of the digital, I think there is a kind of influencer interest connection that, because of the way that algorithms work, gets kind of funneled in a particular kind of way, which means that actually on the edge of that, you get certain other kinds of masculine representation, sometimes certain kinds of influences that can lead into a much more toxic space from where you started. There is that line in Adolescence in the final episode where the father says, I was just looking at some content to do with the gym, and then this other stuff came up there. And I think that's capturing a little bit of the essence of what can happen in these spaces. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. So it's about being aware that that kind of pattern and the way that persuasive design works as well encourages that kind of process to take place.
It's interesting how sneaky these algorithms and how quickly it almost happens, this switch to different content. And Paul, is this a culture which we talk about online almost reflective of some of the stuff that you see when you go into schools and different communities in person? Does that sort of digital culture make sense when you see them in person as well?
100%. I think there's a direct correlation between the two, thinking about what young people are seeing within all their feeds. We know that the age of when young people are getting access to devices and going online younger than they should be, and they're searching for things and finding their own way through the world, which can be it can be damaging, but it can be quite supportive at the same time. It's just that balance of the two things. And when I'm thinking about what young people have discussed with me in the sessions I deliver, whether it's about digital resilience, online safety, whether it's about mental health or well-being, personality, how you present yourself, there are very clear factors that keep coming up again and again, and they're reinforced by the staff members I speak with. So, for example, Ruth, you mentioned about the physical appearance and body ideals. Completely. I think there's that real life pressure on groups of young men in schools to have a certain physique. And they're saying, oh, I'm going to go to the gym when I'm 12 or 13. I'm going to start to bodybuild now. Even though we know that actually when you are still developing your body, you shouldn't be doing it till about 16 because of the way that your body's still growing and going through it. But that real desire and want to have that and to be seen as the best of that in the body ideal is actually quite damaging, not just to their physical self, but to their social group as well. I would say there is a lot of pressure that they feel to do well and perform well at school, so they then become the provider. They have financial stability in the future because they're going to get these jobs that are going to pay them loads of money because of what they've done at school. They are the top dog in their class, if you will. So that performance in academics, the finances they want to achieve going onwards. But then what I find really interesting, there's lots of conflicting expectations that they express. Be strong, but be vulnerable. Be open, but keep it to yourself. Be emotionally open, but be resilient and not too sensitive. All these things really keep coming in as they're going across this linear aspect where they're just going from one end to the other. And it's no surprise that some people feel very confused about where they want to sit, where they do actually sit in the actual structure of where they are in their schools. But I think the biggest thing that I speak about in almost every session, whether I'm doing the work at U-Shoots or doing voluntary work, whatever I've been doing, is the phrases of man up, men don't cry, don't show your emotions. That for me has been, I think, since I started working with young people in youth work and social work in 2003, it was a constant. It was, we don't express emotions. We don't express how we're feeling, because if we do, we are seen as the weak people, and therefore we're going to be targeted by others because we're perceived as weak by that societal norm. So I think everything that Nick and Ruth have been saying, I think, yes, I've been hearing it from the mouths of young people for years. I don't think it's really a new thing either.
It's interesting that you say that there's almost, would you say it's almost flatlined, gone up and down if you were to chart it, or?
I think that's very dependent on who you're speaking to, at what time, where, even what part of the country or the world you're in. It's all very different. Even with young people I worked with in Greece a few weeks ago, they were very emotionally open, and it was wonderful to see. And then I worked in a secondary school, I think it was November last year, where the boys were very shut down because they didn't know how to express their emotions. It's very, very conflicting and different. It's quite hard to judge, actually. It's a really good question, but I don't really know what my answer would be to that at this stage.
Certainly. And Nick, in some of the work that you do, again, in-person work, how do you see this digital landscape, and why do you think that men are so drawn to these influencers like Andrew Tate, which Ruth mentioned, amongst many others? But what do you think spurs these young lads to go on and think, no, this is the content I want to consume, and they let themselves consume that content?
I think that's a great question. And to build on what Paul was so eloquently saying there, these are complex topics. And Ruth has said exactly the same thing. But there's something around online influencers, especially, not just, the more toxic, misogynistic ones, but it's very simple messaging. And I think very often what it does is it kind of, through sound bites, through easy to understand, simple language, makes something complex feel simple. And I think what that gives you is clarity. And when we have clarity, we tend to have a calmer nervous system, even if what we feel clarity about could be considered toxic, and a lot of this stuff is. And I think that, as we've already touched upon, when you get that message reinforced and your social media starts to build itself around where you're feeling that clarity, I think that's when you start to become what I would call falsely empowered, where it starts to be an echo chamber where so much else of the world starts to shut down for you at a time when actually the whole world should be opening up. So it becomes kind of conflictual because your values start to form, you start to get tested, and therefore your nervous system reacts in a very defensive way. And I think this is something that's really common, and speaks to that lack of emotional awareness to be able to hold multiple conflicting truths at the same time. I don't think we get taught these skills. I certainly didn't. And that's why much of what we've discussed already has been the case for quite a long time. I think, a lot of what sits in that man box, boys don't cry. I heard that today twice in the supermarket being spoken to very young children. And these are generational, subconscious cultural norms in this country, at least. And therefore, I think this is something that we all have a vested interest in and responsibility for. But I think, to just bring it back to your direct question, it's the way it's presented as simple.
It's really powerful, really, really powerful. Ruth, would you like to go ahead and give your view on the research side of it?
Yeah, I just would like to jump in a little bit about the design of some of these sites, because I think you used the phrase let themselves consume the content. I think one of the things that for me has been really fascinating to kind of get a bit of an insight into is actually how the design of these apps work. So, for example, in our data, we asked the young people, like, how would you respond to this content? Would you scroll past? Would you like it? So on and so forth. And they would talk about what they would do to either say, yes, I want to see more of this content, or no, I don't. So the Five Rights organization, they've got this brilliant paper where they talk about friction. So in design, friction is when you make something harder. And you usually want to make something as easy as possible for someone to do. So sites, some social media sites, what it's really easy to do is it's really easy to scroll. And it's really easy to scroll quite quickly. And very often you're doing that at a time where you just want to kind of decompress a little bit. You don't want to do that kind of hard critical thinking because it's tired, end of the day, maybe at the bus on the way home. It's kind of soothing. It's actually much harder to say, I don't want to see this, or I'm going to go into my settings and refresh my feed so that actually I change what I'm seeing. So I think there's something around the design of the sites as well, that unless you do some really hard critical thinking about what is this site actually encouraging me to do, we kind of get sucked into. It's very, very easy to get sucked into a way of consuming social media where you're not being encouraged to think hard about things. You're being encouraged to just keep taking the easy message, scroll, rather than actually, oh, maybe I need to stop and think, how do I need to pause and step away and actually think about what this is doing to me, either for good or for ill. So yeah, for me, that kind of like critical thinking piece about, oh, actually, do you know, like, how do I press the not interested button? Where is that? That doesn't show up on the screen very easily. How do I do that? The number of steps you actually have to go through to do that is quite a number of clicks. So yeah, that was just what I wanted to point out, that actually we talk a lot about agency, but sometimes it's hard to have agency unless you put that in place before you even start using something.
Thank you for bringing that point up, Ruth, because every client, and this is men now, every client I work with, whether they come directly to me as something they wish to work on, or indirectly it comes up, phone usage and the habitual dopamine hit, which becomes an embedded behavior. You're absolutely right. And that's when I'm working with those elder men, they didn't grow up with social media, and they're still caught in that. So I think if you've grown up with it, that's becoming embedded as a way of being at a much earlier age. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
And would you all agree? I think that it happens. This sort of content, pretty much, let's be honest, most young men consume it at least once in their life. They'll consume it probably more if they are considered almost vulnerable in some way, shape, or form. It might not be a DSM-5 recognition of vulnerable, but it vulnerable in some way, shape, or form. And what can maybe educators specifically, or people who look after children and young people, be looking out for that might indicate to a boy and young man is struggling with their masculinity, belonging, or even emotional expression per se? Paul?
Yeah, that's really good question. That's definitely something I've been asked from educators, teachers, and actually some of my friends who are still in teaching after I decided to depart that part of my career years ago. It's a challenging thing. And I think there are 10 different things to look out for, but also it's really important to note that there is so much to look out for that it can feel overwhelming for the adults who are there to look out for the well-being of young people as well. But it's just identifying what those things are. So first thing for me would be a withdrawal or emotional shutdown, a change in behavior of a young person. I think that'd be a big indicator. The overcompensating behavior of suddenly acting tough or over toughly, if that is even a phrase, I don't know, but acting in a way that's just too extreme in terms of how they want to be seen. Maybe they are exhibiting these kind of anger or frustration, something that's got no real clear trigger, but there's almost like that ticking time bomb that's just exploded without you even realizing it. Perfectionism or pressure to perform could be another part of it as well. So realizing or saying things or doing things that are saying, well, I want to do better at this, and suddenly I'm doing more of it. So, for example, they didn't go to the gym ever, and suddenly they want to go twice a day, 7 days a week. Like, what's that? What's that dynamic shift there? I think one of the biggest things for me would be when actually any young person struggles, their social and emotional connections are more challenging. So their friendship groups can either shrink, be non-existent. They're more isolated, more alone. How young people actually support themselves through understanding an emotion, and we can do this as adults as well, is using humor as a shield to deflect a question, to deflect how they've been presented maybe the question of how they're feeling and how they're going to express it. Would they then have very kind of rigid beliefs about masculinity and what that actually means? Say, no, this is it. You can't change my mind. That's it. I'm not changing it. Andrew Tate's correct, whoever it might be. I don't know. Just use that as an example. Could be one example there. I think risk taking is a big part of it, and risk as in terms of unhealthy coping strategies. So we can talk about things like smoking, drinking, experimenting with drugs, or other potential sexualized behaviors that will put them at risk of harm. And being really unable to describe or even name an emotion that they're actually feeling, not being able to articulate in any sense whatsoever, just shows that emotional disconnection. And I think to kind of bring it back to a point that Ruth and Nick were so eloquently saying earlier on, is real signs of having online influence or comparison to that person who's achieved all these things that they want to do. So they're going to commit to do all those things. The biggest entrepreneur with the best body and the most female attention or whatever it might be, but that kind of very extreme expectations of themselves. So there is a lot to think about, but I would always say to any adult supporting any young person, if you are noticing anything and your gut is telling you something is wrong, then it will be. I trust my gut on everything, and I tell you now that every single time it's correct. There is something. How you approach it, there are obviously techniques and strategies that you can do. Even just simple things like noticing the shifts, maybe not just the behavior. give them language that they can borrow. So it sounds like you're frustrated because you felt this. Does that, am I making sense? That they can go, oh, okay, yes or no, rather than having to explain it. You can offer, just check and say, you know where I am. I'm in this space. We've got the lesson next. Are you looking forward to it? What are you looking forward to the rest of the week? Changing that side of the discussion. But also, a really simple strategy that I think is really effective is to validate without minimizing the behavior. So you're not wrong for feeling these things, but let's look at something different or a better coping strategy, something that might help you more in the long term. So hopefully my ramble has made some sense, but I've kind of gone through my narrative of your excellent questions, Stephanie. So thank you for asking. I will pass on to whoever's going to go next on this one.
No, definitely. It was really useful, sort of 10 questions almost to ask yourself. Also, some of the ways that we can approach those conversations, because they are really hard. Like, it's hard for the kid, the young person themselves, but there's also a whole other thing of the person who then has to go, hold on a second, I'm now going to intervene, or I'm going to see if I need to intervene.
Yeah.
That is difficult in itself, and I think that needs to be attributed. Nick, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
I think one of my favorite words is curiosity. And I think that when we can bring curiosity, especially if we are the more adult, more mature person in a discussion, or we're trying to create that space, I think it's about bringing curiosity, but creating a safe enough space. We often hear the term safe space. And I'm not against that, but I think we have to allow for somebody to feel discomfort and to be supported, but also challenged. And that's, and if we're going to create those spaces, we have to have the skills to be able to create it and then navigate it. And I think it's creating that non-judgmental aspect around what may come at you, so that you don't then shut down what is spoken about immediately because it disagrees with your own values, or it feels really toxic. It may be both of those things, but actually it's about allowing a younger person to be seen and heard in their experience before we begin to, with curiosity, but as Paul was saying, throwing back some of those supportive skills to show that you've listened, to show that you've heard, to summarize, to reflect back, but then to open up through open questions an opportunity to explore. And actually, I think, and I do this a lot in the coaching approach that I take with young people, is that when they arrive at these junctions where they can have an aha moment of potentially noticing something about what they feel to be true for them, that gives them an opportunity to explore what they feel is true for them. I think that's the real gold if they can arrive at that point. But I think you have to also accept that when you create these spaces, they may not. And therefore, it's about kind of encouraging, gently nurturing and nudging where appropriate. And that's a skill that I am still learning every day.
Completely. And I think we've spoken a lot about the educators, but it's a really different dynamic once we get onto the parent-child relationship, which I always love talking about this because, firstly, I've recently left the education system, or I'm in higher education now, but recently left the education system. Still, I've always had great parents who've always supported me with my mental health, but I know what's worked for me and what's not worked for me as well. And having done this for a few years, I know what works for some parents, and dare I say, and what doesn't as well. So I'd love to, Ruth, if we could have a quick chat about how parents can openly and healthily create this conversation about masculinity with their boys and young men without getting defensive.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that families are really different and hugely varied, and I don't think there is just one thing that will work across the board. I think it depends a little bit on the age of the young person. And so for example, how you would do that with somebody who is 11 is different with how you would do that with somebody who's 16. And I think there are two things that are at stake there with how you both put some age appropriate guardrails in place in terms of what might be accessed, what might not be accessed, but also how you really empower people to have good critical conversations. And I think so there are a couple of things there that if a young person is maybe 13, getting social media there, really having some family agreements that you all keep to about how you use social media. So it's not just about them, it's about all of you having an agreement that you all make about how content is going to be consumed, and then how you think about masculinity in relation to that. Conversations about masculinity don't just come out of thin air, they usually come out of a discussion about something. So I would say it's about really, I guess, parents better understanding the spaces that young people might be in. Easy to make assumptions about, oh, well, why won't you get off this game? Well, understand the game, and then you can help make clear the why you might want to put into place some things that will help you have some boundaries around a particular kind of behavior, a particular kind of content that works for all of you and is about the atmosphere rather than about making kind of judgmental views. I would say a lot of what young people talked to us about was that it was really awkward to initiate conversations with their parents. It's just like not easy, right? How do you do that? And so I think having the opportunity to sort of come alongside while you're doing something else, I know that's very cliched and we kind of know it, but it's true. But I don't know, whether it's playing a game of Jenga or whether it's kind of if you're taking a young person to an activity, whatever that is, say, oh, hey, you know what? I saw that. How do you feel about that? I've seen this. What do you think about this trend? What do you think about this? You know, I don't understand it. You tell me, what does 6'7" mean? Where does that come from? So that you empower them to be having the conversations and accept that fully, that sometimes those conversations are just not going to happen, but be patient, keep the door open. I know I've rambled a lot. So I think, but in a nutshell, depends a lot on the age, and it depends a lot on the family and how you want to handle social media as a whole, as a context in which those contexts about conversations about masculinity occur. Trying as best you can to come into their space while not forcing yourself into it, so you can explain the why you want to have a conversation about something rather than just assuming it has to be had. Making the conversation about something general rather than pointed about them, I think helps a lot. And being willing to share your own experiences, especially not just about the bad stuff, but about what you think is good, and champion the good examples, I think it can be really helpful. So that is a long answer to a short question, but I hope that got the essence of what we hope is helpful there. Just to say that we've worked with, on our project, we worked with Care for the Family as part of their Left to Their Own Devices resources, created some specific materials for parents who particularly want to have a conversation about misinformation. It's not about masculinity, it's about misinformation and mental health. But if that's helpful, do check out this materials as well.
No, thanks for sharing. I think anytime I've spoken to parents, it's always been as many different resources I can get, the better, in a simple way. Sort of, it's always difficult for them. I think it's not cliche because it's true. The do something alongside something else, or the walk and talk, or the drive and talk works really well for men, especially. Just because it's, especially men, they can only do one thing at once, but at the same time you can fake them into doing two things at once, which that's always quite a fun one. But on the non-receiving end, until they've realized that they're actually doing it, and then they realize, oh wait, I am talking about this, and then it's almost a conversation which you're enlightened by because you weren't expecting it. It almost creeped up on you, but you're now flowing and you're going through it. Another thing which I find is so important to tell parents is notice when it's not a good time, because after they come home from school, a incredibly overstimulating environment for so many kids, and if it's not overstimulating, it's tiring. They will come home, and was it my brother? He would come home and he just needed 45 minutes watching YouTube with a mug in front of him, a cup in front of him, and we could not speak to him. We weren't meant to speak to him. There was no need for us to speak to him. But if we went and asked him, so how was your day? Why didn't you tell us anything about your day? And then just keep going and going and going. Obviously, conflict is going to arise. That's quite obvious. But if we do it, we wait, let that time sort of pass, things get a lot easier. And now we know that time's not the time dedicated. It might be different for different families. For some families, time for dinner is perfect. Sometimes dinner time is really not the time for this conversation, but understanding what works for your family that you can try one time. I think that's really important. But Paul, you mentioned something earlier about classrooms and building these skills into the classroom itself. And I was wondering what actually works in building emotional literacy and positive masculinity in boys in classrooms, but also at home in youth settings. What are some of the things which really get through to them?
Oh, you give me the tough question there, haven't you, Stephanie? Thank you for that one. What actually works? I think I want to start by saying that one answer doesn't fit all, which is, I think, hopefully useful in itself, because it's not a case of try one thing. If it works, great. If it doesn't, oh, you've got nothing else left. It's about exploring together. And I think it kind of also, coming back to Ruth's point earlier, we were talking about almost that group role modeling. We were actually working together, and that you've got the same standards and the same things, even with mobile phone usage, where everyone has the same restrictions. It's not just on the children, it can be on the parents as well, because we know that addictions around screen time is prevalent amongst everybody, not just a certain age group. But in terms of classrooms, I'll recenter myself to the actual question. I think as a school culture, to normalize vulnerability and it being okay. One of the phrases that I think is really well used in media campaigns, in work in schools that I've done, is it's okay not to be okay. And just saying it's all right. If you're feeling vulnerable, we all have those moments. And just making sure that message is really pushed into the school culture, whether that's through from what staff do, or what I do at U-Shoots about young people taking the charge and leading their own social mobility projects and campaigns to kind of have that peer-led approach is very, very powerful. So probably that answers the question as well about what works in classrooms. We'll get the young people to tell you what works for them, because they are the agents of change for their own peer group. It just makes sense. I would say making sure, and I think this comes in so many points from beforehand as well, making sure that there are plenty of examples of positive male role models, not just talking about the ones that have the negative influence and impact on us, but bring those ones into focus and say, this is what it means. And I think something I have noticed on my Instagram feed is lots more men in the celebrity sphere are talking about how they're feeling. It's becoming more of a thing. Maybe it's because it's just been November. I don't know. But I think that's a really powerful thing when you just see men being themselves and just talking about how it feels. Particularly powerful when you see it on podcasts or one-to-one interviews on Instagram, for example, which I think would work really well in schools, in classrooms, get young people doing those kind of podcasts where they're talking about emotions and feelings and how it works. I think that's really, really important. But also giving opportunity for young people to speak. I was about to say in a safe space, but I agree with Nick's point about in a space where it's okay to be, and it's almost like a group agreement of what it's like, where they can have turns talking with each other. Where it's a classroom size, a smaller group. There are some great and fantastic youth organisations who do specific programs for addressing masculinity and for men. Boys to Men is one I'm thinking of at the moment, and positive masculinity is another one. They're fantastic, really great male role models who run these workshops for young people to allow them to express it. I see the impact on my LinkedIn feed. It's absolutely wonderful what they do, because they give that safe space for these men to actually have conversations with young men to then develop themselves into the best versions they're going to be. But it's not just about that kind of turn taking in small groups, giving time to think, but it's also teaching them bystander confidence. I think this comes into my previous role when I was program manager for the anti-bullying team at the Dana, which was amazing. But this whole bystander effect about how people just stand on the sidelines and don't say or do anything, and I never quite understand why people don't just do the right thing to push their comfort zone to support another person. And I think if you have that confidence, you then can support your peer. You can interrupt unharmful behaviours. You can call them out. You can challenge them. The most powerful interventions I've seen, I'm thinking of one example in a session I did a few years ago where there was quite a controversial statement made, and one of the young people said, well, actually, I think you're wrong there, because that's not what this actually means. What it means is, and what you just said has affected that person over there, and this is supposed to be our safe space. So powerful. As the facilitator, I didn't have to do anything else because they were literally doing it for me. But that power of youth voice, I think, is one of the most concussive, changing factors you can ever have for the mindsets of young people. So I hope that's really good food for thought, Stefan. I feel like I've rambled again, but it happens.
I completely agree, Paul, and I love the idea of, it's something I speak about a lot now, is how purpose in young people can reduce a lot of the issues that we see and a lot of the things that certain newspapers like to blame on young people. If we empower them in certain ways, then those issues very quickly reduce. I don't want to say disappear, but they reduce in intensity.
Yeah.
But Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on supporting young men in these environments.
I'd like to start by just reflecting on creating psychological safety, which has kind of 4 key elements to it. There's the inclusivity of it, including things that we might find difficult, but then we also have to find learner safety, that we're all going to be coming into these spaces at different levels. Then we have to feel that we're able to contribute and be part of it. And here's the key thing: we have to be able to invite challenge. In the work that I do with schools, it's mostly actually with the teachers and the leaders. And very often they feel ill-equipped to lead these spaces and these conversations. And actually a lot of the self-leadership work that we're doing with these leaders is to upskill them to become more comfortable in creating psychological safety, firstly within themselves, because there's an element of co-regulation here, that a teacher who is dysregulated is going to struggle to create an environment that's for optimal learning, and where some of these more difficult discussions and behaviors can be addressed, which is why we tend to see quite reaction against reaction from kids to adults. And that's not a criticism, because none of us were ever taught any of this stuff. So I think for me, there's something about, whether you are within education or whether you're a parent, if you are an adult and you want to be involved, and I think we all have a responsibility to be involved in creating as healthy a next generation of masculinities as possible, I think we have to look at ourselves compassionately and curiously and saying, where can I upskill myself? And to give ourselves the time and to look for the CPD and to actually talk to some of these spaces that Paul mentioned, because they are growing these little environments for men of all ages to potentially begin to do this. And that is great. But I think the more we can normalize this and take responsibility and actually be vulnerable ourselves and say, I find this quite challenging. It's my responsibility to try and create these spaces and have these conversations at different times. But actually, I'm learning as well while I'm doing this. I want everyone to feel that that's okay. I don't need to be a perfectionist version of myself in order to create a successful space for young people to explore what masculinity means for them. And I think actually it's the connecting nature of vulnerability. It offers beautiful, to quote Brené Brown, fairy lights of connection when it's done in a way that's authentic. So that's
very, very, very true. Very true. And I think the way that we bring all the different parts together, I think is so important. I think that I used to work at a health tech, and we would help families with their kids' mental health through the school, basically, and connecting these three dots. And then there's also obviously the healthcare worker, if needs be, on the side as well. But connecting all those dots is so complicated, but so important. And you think, oh, it's dot, 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 connect it, easy, triangle. But there's so many different parts, and it's getting everyone on side. And getting everyone on side is not easy. And I think, Nick, you alluded to it earlier, of you have to convince the teachers that this is right, this is the right approach to have, and that this is a fair approach to have, not only right. So I think as we approach the end, I just would love to know if there's a final thoughts, but also if there's anything that you'd want, the one thing you'd want every adult to take away from this session to support young men. What would that be? Ruth, I'll start with you.
Don't judge them based on what you think is going on. Ask them a good question, take time to say hello, and give them time and space to get beneath the surface. Become a trusted friend to them.
Nick?
I definitely think that learning to become comfortable in the discomfort of your own experience and holding space for other people is one of the most beautiful things that you can do. And as part of that, allowing for silence and reflection. And I think a lot of, we often hear it's good to talk, and that's true. But very often we need to talk and let go of stuff before that creates space within us to actually get to the hub of what it is we want to express. And sometimes not allowing silence can shut that back down. So I think the art of silence is really important.
Completely agree. Such a vital thing that we always forget. And we always have, especially in this world of do, we forget to, and I get told this way too much, but we forget to be as well. For final thoughts.
I would say be open for young people so they feel like they belong and they're supported. If they feel that way, I think there's nothing you can't achieve for them.
Love that. I've got one before we have sort of a end on a positive note. I think my personal one would be, it is hard for men. It is really hard for young boys. And the first time I sort of really had my first thought about masculinity when I started campaigning was really, I hate the phrase toxic masculinity, and I'm so glad that all the panelists have said it. We've said the word toxic, but we've not put them next to each other, because we've all heard it in schools and campuses, wherever we are, because it's such a damning phrase. And if we keep telling young people, as Paul said, about the negative influences and the people who are doing wrong, and the ones who we need to watch out for, or all of these things you're not doing right, they're just going to think that they're a horrible person. I'll be completely honest. Like, that's how it feels as a young person. And I want to share an example of I was once putting up posters in a boys' day house. So it was about 86 boys in this house and at school, and it was posters about Eating Disorders Awareness Week, I think it was, or BEAT, and the theme of the year was men who have eating disorders, something like that. And that was a statistic about the prevalent. I think 1 in 4 eating disorder cases are men, if I'm not mistaken, or it was at the time, I think. And someone came up to me, and I knew one of his siblings had been in an inpatient treatment, and he goes, "I've been to one of those centers. I don't think that's the case." Very sort of, I know what I'm talking about. And I go, I was initially about to be defensive, and then I go, hold on a second. Like, bear in mind, this is the person who you would not think is going to be talking to you about mental health, masculinity, or anything like that any day of the week. And I go, well, that's a statistic. If you want to, you're a statistical person. If you want to confront it, be my guest. But that's what the facts say. These are the leading people for eating disorders in the UK. It's an issue. This is the issue. Let's talk about it. And he sort of looked at me. His face almost like thought he's probably got some sort of logical sense. And it was sort of this shift that you could see the cogs turning. And that's the point which I'm trying to make is the power of that one conversation, and how important that all is those are the things which actually make the difference. In a world where it is so hard for men to be, and those conversations are so important, and men will make mistakes. I've made loads. Paul, yes or no, have you made many mistakes? Nick, you've got your hand up. Men make mistakes.
Human beings do, whatever gender identity we attribute to ourselves. Making mistakes is human.
Exactly. So what I want to say with this is that mistakes are completely normal, and they are completely understandable. So be polite when they happen. Be comforting. Yes, you can be angry, but at the same time, then you have to realize that anger is not going to solve anything. So take yourself out of that. And it's the Spark Advent Calendar this year, and the theme that they have, which Paul knows very well, it's lovely, is a message to your younger self. And it's the 5th and final year that Sparky K is running this. I'm incredibly proud of Connor. It's been a long journey for him, but this year you've all received charity status, which is a huge milestone. And I just want to give my kudos to the trustees and the team at Sparky K. But if we could finish this lovely webinar, this lovely discussion, with a message to your younger self. So, Paul, would you be willing to start?
Oh, I knew you were going to come to me first on that one. Message to my younger self is you are worth more than you think you are at the moment, and things will always be okay.
Nick?
Well, even throughout this conversation, I've felt younger versions of me kind of sitting here applauding, saying this is great that this conversation's happening. And so I think part of my own journey towards better mental health is actually just accepting that to my younger self, that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get everything right all of the time, and you can just be yourself. The people that you are with right now aren't the only people available to you for the rest of your life. You can find your people, try and develop the strength, the courage, and the resilience to be yourself as often as you possibly can. And actually, you did a bloody good job doing that. You did the best you could, and we're all right.
It's brilliant. Ruth, do you mind if I come to you?
I think probably one thing more than anything else, which is just don't be so hard on yourself. Just don't be so hard on yourself.
That's so important. I was going to go for a cliche of like, your voice matters, but I think I'll go for one which is even more cliche, and is be yourself. Because I think I've, for a long time in my life, not been myself, but I think I've not truly been myself. And I've shown up in different ways and different environments, in ways which I know wasn't what I wanted to show in that environment. So I think it really is be yourself. And I think on that, I'll close with saying that there is a similar webinar, but slightly different. And it is with Connor Warren himself in the hosting chair, I believe. And then with a good friend of mine, Ben West, as well as Shocker and Sean Flores. That's on Thursday evening, same place. And that will also be recorded, but that promises to be a very good conversation. And if you'd like to donate to the Sparky Advent Calendar, there is a QR code at the top left. and more information can be found on their website at the allstaracademy.co.uk. Without further ado, big thank you to Ruth Page, Nick Edgar, and Paul Hanmore, as well as everyone at Spark UK for this incredible, for being able to facilitate this incredible conversation. Thank you very much to everyone.